Fun with problems, and then just problems. Timothy Harrington joins us from NuLife Virtual. He is an addiction recovery coach, Renoventionist, and family recovery support specialist. They are a human-centered, social, and mobile healing app to support addiction treatment centers and individual practitioners in delivering increased access to care, improved health, continuing care, and increased revenue. Enjoy. Welcome to the Illuminate Recovery podcast. We shed light on mental health issues, mental illness, and addiction recovery, ways to cope, manage, and inspire. Beyond the self-care we will discuss, you may need the help of a licensed professional. My name's Kurt Nider. I'm a husband, a father, entrepreneur, a handyman, and a student of life. I avoid conflict, I deflect with humor, and I'm fascinated by the human experience.
And I'm Shelley Mangum. I am a clinical mental health counselor, and my favorite role of all times is grandma. I am a seeker of truth, and I feel like life should be approached with tremendous curiosity.
I ask the dumb questions.
I fill in the gaps.
The Illuminate Recovery podcast is brought to you by Illuminate Billing Advocates. Make billing and collection simple with leader in substance abuse and mental health billing services. Verification and analysis of benefits, pre-authorizations, utilization management, accurate claim submission and management, denial and appeal management, and industry-leading reporting. Improve your practice's cash flow and your ability to help your clients with Illuminate Billing Advocates.
Today is a super fantastic day. Besides the fact that the sun is shining, I get to spend some time with Timothy Harrington. Timothy is the Chief Marketing Officer at NuLife Virtual out of Los Angeles. In 2020, held great promise for Tim and his vision for personal and professional growth. What he did not, of course, know and anticipate was COVID, or meeting J.D. Meents, founder of NuLife Virtual, where he became VP of Marketing and Business Development for a human-centered, social, and mobile healing app to support addiction treatment centers and individual practitioners in developing increased access to care, improved health and continuing care, and increased revenue. Timothy, thanks for taking some time out of your schedule to be with us today.
Absolutely, Shelley. Thank you so much.
It's kind of fun. Timothy and I have been talking a little bit before we started the broadcast, and I've been getting to know him, and I'm super fascinated, so super excited to hear your story. Maybe, just for our listeners, give us a little bit of background of how you ended up in the world of, substance abuse.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thank you for inviting me to be on with you. We talked a little bit about podcasts, and I had done one too, and how much we learn from these things. So I'm excited for that always. I had a tumultuous love affair I was set up to end up having a relationship with alcohol for sure, because it was part of our rituals in our family. It was everywhere. It was just what it was. It was just generational, I'm sure, right? How those things work. And so I remember very clearly when I was a little kid, being all dressed up for a Christmas party, right? And I'm like, I don't even know how old I'm a little guy, right? And everybody is these giants, and they're wearing tuxedos and beautiful sparkly dresses, and there's clinking and laughing and smoking, and it seems really wonderful, and I'm just looking around and just soaking it all in and observing it. And somebody sets down one of these clinky drinks that everybody seems to be enjoying. So I'm like, hey, I'm going to try that. Like, why wouldn't I? I'm modeling, right? I'm like, that's what they're doing. That's what I'll do. So I remember having the looking at the drink. I didn't know what it said. I don't think I could read at that time, maybe, or didn't really understand it. But it was a yellow glass with a couple of see-through holes around it. And then on the glass itself was printed booze. My grandparents had a sense of humor, and most of my family is the sense of humor, a lot of sarcasm. But anyway, I took a drink of it, and I was like, that's taste. I like the taste of that, And so then, just fast forward. I don't get blasted or anything, or end up throwing up in the woods or in the flower beds or whatever, like I've heard 1,000 meetings I've been to. But, it's important because the context is super important for me. As I sit in the armchair right now and look back at my life, that's where you get all the lessons. While it's happening, I just am experiencing it. And I remember later on in my life, inheriting those glasses and drinking out of them as a person who had this relationship. I call it a love affair with vodka. It was my favorite. And cocaine as a chaser. And it took me where it took me, and it became unmanageable. It was fun with problems, and then just problems is kind of the progression of it. And why it's important is because the susceptibility was always there. It was modeled to me that smoking and drinking was just a part of what we did as a family. And then also emotionally, it was a lubricant, and it was a coping mechanism. And I was wondering, why is this our revelry, and why do we have these rituals? And it's very clear that we had generational trauma as I started to get into the causes and conditions and not just the behavior and symptoms. And it's really important to me as a professional and even as a person who's delivering NuLife Virtual, as you described, and this idea of digital care and where the world is going, especially in behavioral health and other areas of healthcare, is that we don't have a lot of context in terms of this space, in terms of why people use. We really focus on sort of dealing with the behavior and symptoms. And so when I was a kid, I always describe this story when I speak in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, which I'm a member, is I talk about another very strong memory is when my parents got separated. Of course, I don't understand what's going on, but what I do know is my dad doesn't live there anymore, and my mom tells me he's going to come pick me up. So I'm standing at the screen door, right, my face pressed against the screen, and I remember this day particularly there was rain, and you could hear cars coming down my street because the tires making that sound that tires make when they go over the wet pavement. And I'm thinking, everyone is my dad, right? And everyone just goes by, right? And every time it goes by, I feel this punch in my gut, right? Because I love my dad. And I'm standing there, and I don't realize how much time has come, but apparently quite a bit. I'm not going anywhere, right? And because I want my dad. And so this is a major shift in my life, because the way that kids process these kinds of events is they don't say, hey, what's wrong with my dad? They say, hey, what's wrong with me? Right? So my whole orientation of the world and my relationship with it is shifted because I'm being rejected or neglected or abandoned by this person that I absolutely know without a shadow of a doubt need in my life, right? And love. And so fast forward through all of that context and everything that happened, and how that affected every relationship that I ever had, including the guy at the 7-Eleven who was checking me out and not giving me what I want or asking me for an ID for this whatever. And I have this angst in me all the time in terms of that relationship and that what I call like the original wound. And later on I had more wounds, I had more things happen to me because that's just life, right? And I'm not processing it, and everybody else has their challenges processing it, right? And so we're all just doing the best we can. And so it gets to the point where I become mobile homeless as I develop this relationship with, I call it mobile homeless because it's a high bottom. I still have a car. I'm driving around, right? It's like, that's tall cotton when you're dealing with these kinds of challenges. I still have a car. I don't have much money, and I don't have a plan, at least not a good one. But what I do know is that the common thread through this whole part of my life from that sort of original wound was wanting to manage and wanting to be loved and wanting to not feel pain, or at least that kind of pain, really any kind of pain, because it's all connected. And as we develop and as we evolve, we figure out how to deal with those different challenges around relationships and around pain and things like that. And that just happened to be my path. And every bit of it matters in a good way, right? When you're in it, it's just like, when is this going to end? And I want to get off this ride now, and I just want it to stop. And I want to figure out what's the secret handshake to all this. Like, where is the secret room where everybody's doing awesome? You know what I mean? That's kind of my orientation, because I feel like I've been left out, rejected and neglected and abandoned, and I'm just out here and this is my lot. And that's very painful. And so through a series of events that's really too long to get into, but a lot of coincidences and a lot of people who loved me and cared for me, angels along the way, many, many, many angels. And I became open to them as I got into more pain, into more sort of despair, right? It sort of opens you up a little bit. And so I took a chance on this one offering, and I went to this meeting, and I had a conversion experience where I felt something that I hadn't felt for a long time, which is basically sort of unconditional love, we'll call it, right? And so that broke me open just enough, okay? I wasn't fully open. I'm not going to just let it all hang out, right? So just a little bit broken up, but just enough for something to get in there that started to work, right? And we'll call it the heart space, right? And it started to do a little magic in there. And it's not perceptible at that point, because I'm still very guarded. I'm still not trusting fully. I'm still unsure. I'm still uncertain. And I'm still hurt. And I'm afraid you might turn on me and hurt me like other people have in my life. And so I just decided to stay because I didn't really have other options, honestly. And this was just good enough at that moment to sort of keep me interested, let's say, right? And met some incredible people with great senses of humor that reminded me of what was comforting about being in my family. And they didn't really seem to want anything from me, right? It was just an exchange of ideas or stories and all of that stuff. And heck, man, that's very entertaining. I was doing that when I was drinking. So there wasn't a lot of difference in terms of that. I just wasn't partaking in vodka and cocaine at that time. So I actually remembered those conversations at a much higher level. And so started to, as I got into recovery, or as I like to call it, discovery, I started discovering more and more about myself and other people. And that just kept progressing. And I ended up in the behavioral health care space because somebody said you should work in treatment. And I came from restaurants. I didn't want to go back there. It was a little bit too hectic and chaotic for me. And so I said, oh, okay. All right. Never really thought about doing that. I had been to treatment, didn't think about working in it. Got into the treatment business as a program tech, driving people around, waking them up, all that sort of stuff, the administrative part of treatment, inpatient. And found it very interesting as from that perspective of working there. Started to ask some questions, got very curious about treatment, and then ended up becoming what they call a recovery companion, right? So I went from working in treatment to like going home with people who are transitioning out of treatment and living with them 24 hours a day, right? So I liken that to being like an embedded journalist in like a war zone. Because people leave treatment and they go back, and this will get to this point of what Renovention, you mentioned Renovention, is where you go back, and there's a saying in recovery that says it's hard to be a new person in an old place. Okay, so the old place is the family system, because they haven't gotten nearly as much attention as you have in treatment. And so they're sort of still a shack while you're sort of this new, like, you've got a new gloss of paint on, a new coat of paint, right? Put on some pounds, you've got your color back in your skin, and it's different. And the family's like, they're just kind of still hobbling along because that's the way treatment is. It's 90% of the person in treatment, 10% of the juice goes to the home, and that's just not right? So I'm in this system, right, and I'm seeing all the dysfunction. I'm seeing people get triggered back and forth. And pretty soon, before you know it, all the work that was done in treatment has sort of been undone, because we go right back to those old things we talked about, those rituals, those things we're used to, right? And we just easily fall back into them. And so I'm like, wow, this is tough. We need to up our game in terms of family. And so just to cut out a lot in the middle there is that after I did this recovery companion work and sort of was on the fast track of like, what do we really need to do to raise our game in this space to really help people not go back to an old place, but something that is more compatible, that has much more skill to deal with somebody in those challenging relationships between mother, brother, sister, lover, whoever you're going back to, that system. And so I started to get into, I got trained as a family recovery coach. And so I was really interested in how to help those families. And so I really went head first into that. For 12 years, I coached families. And at a very intense level, I called it all in. And so I was available to them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because, when it's happening in real time, we need to engage rather than waiting for a session where you're just sort of recounting what happened, and you don't have the opportunity to, get in there and mix it up. And so that's what I was doing for the last 12 years before I ended up doing this NuLife thing. But it taught me a lot about treatment. And this is what's really important about my personal journey as it overlaps professionally, is that for a long time, there's been lots of opportunity for us in this space to innovate and evolve. But we've been resistant. We've been sort of complacent. And we talked about that earlier as personal recovery. That's really not going to get us anywhere if we remain complacent or stagnant. We're probably going to slide back, or at the very least, not move forward. And I feel like, as I've worked in this field for 19 years, that we've kind of gotten complacent and a little bit stagnant. And so that's what gets me up every day still, is this opportunity for innovation, right? Super excited every day of like, what if we did this and we sort of moved just a little bit, right? Because I know we like big shifts, but oftentimes we get overwhelmed. So how do we just take little bitty steps, right? Like I did with the family. Like, here's a handhold and here's a foothold, and let's get comfortable there before we go to the next phase. Because otherwise people get overwhelmed and they'll sort of quit, or they'll draw back a little bit from overwhelm. And so how can we, as individuals and as enterprises or facilities who are delivering services, take these little micro steps that move us towards getting better at increasing our access to treatment for people? Because of the 23 million people that need treatment, they don't all need inpatient, obviously, right? And they're available to virtual. That's what COVID has proven to us. And so we've got these structural changes, these cultural changes, and all these things that are sort of building this perfect storm for treatment to sort of expand and innovate, right? So we can meet people where they are, so they get the opportunity to expand and innovate themselves while we deliver services, from a distance, recovery in place, because people are down for that now on the continuum, virtual first or continuing out of treatment. And so what we're doing is we're creating this new paradigm, or this new dynamic, to sort of fulfill the promise that we've sort of always had in the space of addiction treatment. And that is aftercare, continuing care, staying connected, outcomes, tracking outcomes, so that we get better at treatment delivery, so that we know that what we're delivering is really working for the people we're treating, and all of those things. And so that goes to that meeting in 2020 with JD, when he told me the story of bringing technology and merging it. This is before sheltering in place, when he told me the story. And I was like, that makes a lot of sense at a high level, and you've been working on this since 2017. And I see the work you put into this, and I see where it's going. I'm in, because I want to help renovate or do a renovation on the field, so that we can get better, so that we can upgrade, so that we can meet patients where they are, and then take them the full journey, because we can stay in touch with them using technology and leveraging that constant contact, because people have these in their hands all the time. These things aren't going anywhere. Like I always say, like, people come into treatment and they come in hot, like inpatient, and they come in with the phone in their hand. It may be cracked, it may be whatever, but they hang on to it because this is a lifeline. It is absolutely a lifeline. So we want to leverage that in a good way, so that once somebody comes in and then leaves treatment, that we can stay connected with them at a high level and continue to deliver and monitor and keep that close relationship going, because the longer we are connected, the better the outcomes are going to be. And so that's what I look like as a person who has their own journey through, like, not being connected over time at a high level with my treatment center. It was basically like, go to meetings and don't drink. And I had a lot more issues than that. I had a lot of ground to cover, and I had a lot of things to deal with. And I think really to that point is that what I believe about what we do in this space is that we don't save people's lives. What we do is if we really at a high level hold the space for them to respect their individual process, we can shorten their addiction and treatment careers. That's what I really think is the opportunity, right? Because I know there's this idea of like, being of service and saving lives. Yes, in a way, but not in an egoic way, but in a way that says, I'm meeting you where you are, and then I'm going to be there with you. I'm not going to just treat you and then leave, right? And say, good luck. I'm going to stay with you, because we need that continual connection, because we have to intervene, because it's not a straight line, right? You and I know that. It's not like it's like, it's up and down. And so we need that high level of connection and connectivity to continually to intervene, so we don't have that high reoccurrence of relapsing, right? Certainly to the point where all four wheels have to come off again. We can intervene earlier. That saves costs, right? All kinds of capital gets saved. And so the excitement behind this is that we can intervene, or we can renovate, or do a renovention, if you will, on this process, so that we can increase access, right? We can lower costs, we can improve outcomes, right? And we can have this new paradigm experience that is going to sustain treatment centers, because we have this whole new offering that we can do that is going to contribute to our bottom line, and then also contribute to the patient's bottom line in terms of outcomes. And so that's that win-win balance that I've been looking for since I've been in this field for 19 years, where there's an equanimity, right? It's not treatment-centered, it's patient-centered, because we're paying attention to the patient for the long term, for the client, so that we can make sure they stay on track, so they don't have to rinse and repeat, more costs. And that's the opportunity every day for me too, as an individual. I mean, take this right down to you and me. That's my opportunity as an individual, is to do that same sort of process. Stay close to you, stay connected to you, be reminded that the journey is not a straight line. Be reminded that I need behavioral nudges, because I'm not perfect, and life happens to us. And so this whole idea of recovery being for life is super important. This 30, 60, 90-day paradigm is nonsense. We need continual flow. If you come into my treatment center, you and I are in this together for life. That's the way I look at it.
Well, and it has to be that way, Timothy. I'm taken with what you're describing, because it's almost like this system we've always known where the breakdowns are. We've always seen, you send them home and then it just deteriorates, right? We've seen it. And here you are with this, with this program that says, I know that you're going to not want to talk to me when you go home, and go back into this culture that supported this behavior in the past. So we're going to go with you so you can figure out how to navigate that. I love what you're sharing, because it's so powerful, and it's what we know. We already know it. You've just put it into play.
It's like air traffic control. Can you imagine if we didn't have that in place in terms of flying around and how we take off and land, and the coordination of care, this idea of coordination of care, and this idea of ease of use through different levels. Right now it's very clunky, right? The handoffs are clunky. There's these gaps you talk about, that people fall through for one reason or the other. And we're trying to up our level of game in terms of care coordination or air traffic control, so we don't crash into each other, so that it's smooth, so that takeoffs and landings, right? Because it's kind of like that in this space. You've got, while someone's taking off, someone else is landing, right? And how do we coordinate this care, and how do we do this at a level that is efficient for the people who are in this space? Because I know workloads are real in treatment, right? They're real and they're tough. We know about burnout. We know about compassion fatigue. We know about all of these things, right? We know about how the old model churns people in and out of this field, right? There's a big churn. There's a burnout and there's a churn. And so we need to develop efficiencies, because people who come into this business come in for the right reasons, don't they?
Yep.
100% committed to helping people, right? And so we need to give them the tools that allow them to stay longer and really get to the point, which is which is managing care coordination, relationship, and connection. And right now, there's a lot of friction and a lot of noise involved in that, right?
Yeah.
And we need to work on those efficiencies so that the person who is paying with their time and their capital and their resources gets the attention necessary for the long haul, right? Not just in these episodic things that we have, these episodes of care, right? These 30, 60, 90 days, these inpatients, these outpatients. We need to be able to, in any way possible, make sure that we coordinate that care for life, right? That's why we say NuLife for life, because it is that journey, and we owe it to ourselves to figure out how to coordinate care at a high level to make sure that we give people the best chance of success.
Well, the other thing that I hear you talking about is something that I've been, asking people about is can your job in recovery be your recovery? And on some level, no, you've got to do more. But what you're talking about is you need that connection. We all need that connection, the same as the next person. And when you go out and help this person and connect with them, you also receive connection from that. And there's healing in that, right? And so it's not just
social healing, it's called. That's what you're talking about.
Yep.
And that's really important because, and I'll tell you why social healing is so important, and we need to talk about it more at a high level because we have a shortage of credentialed professionals. We have a shortage of psychologists, psychotherapists, counselors. Huge. We don't have enough people to do the work for the people who are needing it. And if you know what COVID did, need went up, but the supply went down, right? Because not everybody pivoted right. So you had all these people saying, I need help, and you had supply going down. So, right, we had this. And so what is the lesson of that? The lesson of that is that we need to keep going forward by embracing digital care, virtual care, whatever you want to call it, this idea of remote patient monitoring or this idea of remote recovery, remote treatment. We need to really respect that as a new paradigm, as a new adjunct to a brick and mortar. We call it click and mortar now. So we can join these two things. We merge technology with the bricks and the mortar so that we, again, can create this best chance of success scenario. And the idea of social healing is the idea of who contains us when we can't get all the time that professional therapy or we can't afford it anymore. This may be. How do we involve paraprofessionals and the social healing aspect at a high level, which means how do we keep people engaged, right? That's our job at NuLife Virtual, is to figure out once we have people on a platform, a digital platform, is what are they looking for? What would make them more likely to stay engaged, right? And that's the social part. So we have this social media style piece on the platform where you can, in a very safe environment, a HIPAA compliant, secure, private environment, talk about what's going on with you, inspire others, exchange ideas. That's peer-to-peer, that's peer-to-professional, and that's also professional to professional, because that connection as far as social healing is important for the reasons we talked about, which is burnout and this idea of like, I'm just exhausted. I don't have one more hour to give. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean.
It's a tough job.
But yeah, it takes a tremendous amount of energy to sit with somebody and really resonate with them and be with them. It takes a lot of energy, and I don't think people understand that as much. I have, so I have a question, and this is something that I think other people will be asking too. Is we just talked about how important connection is, right? And that connection, that belonging, that support. I imagine it in a virtual setting, and I heard a lot of people go, I can't do this anymore. I can't do the virtual thing anymore. Like I'm going crazy. I got to see people. That in a virtual setting, there's those that you've got to address that piece of that real human connection, touch to touch and face to face, real live. Whereas virtual is powerful. I'm not saying it's not, but I think there has to be another aspect, and I bet you have an answer for that.
100%. I mean, there's no doubt we're social creatures, and this idea of like where we've come so far. You and I mean, this isn't new. Like, this is e-commerce. You and I have been involved in e-commerce since 2000, right? Since people were telling Jeff Bezos that nobody's going to buy books online when I could just go to the bookstore, right? So this is that convergent moment. And if you look at the pattern, right? Everybody was like, "Oh my God, what about bookstores?" Bookstores are still here. In fact, Amazon invests in bookstores, okay? So the idea of this hybrid model, or this equanimity, this balance of in-person and digital, is 100% where it's going, right? You've just seen this exponential moment in time. This exponential change agent called COVID-19 has shown us in a very quick way what would have taken many more years to evolve in terms of that balance. So we're very lucky about that, because we are going to pay attention to the notion of in-person and virtual. We need both, because the in-person model cannot support longitudinal care. It's too expensive. This is the reason why digital care, the investment is crazy, because the real hard costs are going to go down. And that's important, because by doing that, we're inviting more people to the party. And this is about inclusivity. And the more we pay attention to cost control, the more we open the funnel for more people to come in and access care. And what we're going to see, and this is one of the trends I think is really important for people to understand, is because we have a shortage of these professionals, credentialed professionals like yourself, clinicians and psychotherapists, and whoever has gone to work, gone to school and put their life's blood into this, are going to be augmented and supported by health coaches. This is the next phase of who's going to come in. This is that gap that's going to be filled, because we must have it. Because if we don't, then we're not going to really get behind cost containment. And you're going to see, and you've already seen, if you know this, is that coaches are being reimbursed now at a higher level than they ever have been, to address the equanimity issue, the equality issue in terms of delivery of services. There is a cutoff point for people who can afford or can't afford therapy, okay? So if we can augment this through these, now we're creating this hub and spoke that gives people the best chance of success. We've got people who need to deliver trauma therapy. We need that, okay? We need to do that. Then once that is expended, right, we're going to need more support. So now we have recovery coaches, or we have health coaches, or whatever we need, so we fill these gaps, right? And to keep the costs down, we're going to have to deliver those digitally, right? Because we're not going to be able to afford it. Not everyone is going to be able to afford it. And we want everybody to come to the party, because, as you know, more and more people need services, but supply is going down. So that's why digital is being invested in, because we need to be able to address what we can't address purely in the brick and mortar. And so what I love about this idea of virtual is that we talk about it that way, right? We need to be culturally appropriate in terms of how we're going to engage in merging technology with brick and mortar, because it's going to make the difference ultimately in outcomes. So now we can do home visits. Hey, how about that, right? And if I could just mention something really quickly, one of the things that gave me chills about what happened during COVID, in terms of what therapists like yourself discovered about how the relationship went to another level because of virtual, is people never saw where people lived. And so one therapist was saying, I'd never been to a dairy farm before, but my client took me to the barn and showed me what she did when she wasn't in therapy. I got to meet her sister. I got to meet her dog. I got to see where she lived. And that made a big difference in terms of the therapeutic alliance. And that gives me chills. I literally have chills, because although it's not perfect, it does add value, right? When you can do that, when you can say, this is where I live, this is my house, this is my view, this is my mother, brother, sister, lover, this is my dog, this is my, my lizard or whatever. This is me, right? This is where I live, this is my environment. And again, culturally, we will adapt in terms of this hybrid model. We will adapt, and it will pay off. It's just we're kind of in that awkward stage, right? We're a little clunky because there's that resistance. There's that in-person is better, the sort of, now we're in the extremes. We're working our way to this balance in the middle, where it's like yes and yes, both and, not either or.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And we've been in, technology has been a huge part of our life. Like you said, everybody carries that phone. I think this is a question that I thought of, in the wee hours of the morning as I'm waking up, and like, do homeless people have their cell phones? Like, and I would imagine a good share of them have their cell phones. Like, that's a necessity, right?
Yes, they do. And I'll tell you, what's interesting about what's happened with COVID also is that it is exponentially moving forward the need to address things like smartphone usage, where somebody who is necessarily homeless, but keeping them in, again, a process of containment where you couldn't otherwise do it because it's just face-to-face. People miss a point. You talk about no-shows. No-shows have gone down because of the convenience, transportation issues, working schedules, all of those things, which are typically, just deal breakers for a lot of people in terms of consuming services. And so at a high level, Congress and policy is going to start to address some of these inequities involved in the healthcare market. Digital is going to do their part. We're going to do our part as we develop a feedback loop whereby we take some of our profits and put it into a nonprofit, not our nonprofit, but somebody else who's doing work around providing people with the proper technology, actually teaching healthcare technology literacy. Okay, this is going to be huge. That's one of the things we're thinking about getting involved in because there's a huge gap. And then also lobbying for companies like Verizon and AT&T and these other people who are the access points for digital consumption to give rebates or tokens or whatever they can to people who are consuming services like through Talkspace or some digital platform where they get a discount on their phone bill because they're engaging in that process. Does that make sense?
I like that. I like that a lot, to motivate them, right? To engage in the very thing that they need the most.
Exactly, and giving them the technology that allows them to do that at a high level, because we're talking about connectivity rates, we're talking about throttling, we're talking about I don't have any more minutes on my phone, all of these things, right? And the reason why people and companies like Walmart at a high level and Amazon are getting involved in this because they're going to drive the costs down. They're just going to. And if you have a Walmart in your town, you can go and consume mental health services. I mean, that's just it. You go into your Walmart where you get your milk and you can do that. And that's cool. I mean, I think because what we're going to do is we're going to start because people are it's going to, grow in that sense in terms of access. That hopefully is going to drive down stigma, because stigma is one of my biggest things. And I told you earlier, that we went on a 25-city tour and across the country in a bus talking about mental health and addiction-related stigma, because it's the number one barrier to access to care. Personal stigma, social stigma, and family stigma are the number one barriers for people to actually reach out and say, help me. And so that's a big part of what technology can do. It completely can erase the stigma. I can consume services with you and nobody has to know. I don't have to have an addict identity or even a recovery identity. I can just be me. And so that's a really cool part that needs to be discussed too at a high level about what digital can do and virtual can do for people.
Talk about that just for a minute more. You had this tour around the country for a year in a converted bus. Who went, and really talk about kind of the touch points of what happened during that tour.
Yeah, so it was my wife and I, my 2 teenage daughters, and a dog in 250 square feet, and I couldn't recommend it more for a lot of reasons. It teaches you how much you really need in terms of material things, physical things, because we had 250 square feet. And it also teaches you at a higher level how to get along with people, what needs to be talked, because I called it the excuse me, pardon me tour, because we were always getting around each other on the bus because it's so confined. But those were moments, those were touch points where I took advantage and I hugged everybody all the time. Like I would just be like, hug, and just keep moving on. Because in a house of, 2,000 square feet, people are blown out, right? You don't have the opportunity unless you're intentional. And during COVID, I was sort of like on a bus, just a bigger one. But I would go around and check in with people and give them hugs because I had kind of already been doing that. But once things changed and opened up, we have spread apart even more, right? In California, we're like open. I mean, it's weird still to even say that. But culturally, systemically, we are different in a very big way, very quickly, right? Mm-hmm. So it reminds you of how important the intentionality is of connection. And that's really thematic between you and me. We've talked a lot about this before we got on here and then since. So I'm going to kind of sum it up here because I've been talking a lot. But what I want to say sort of in closing is that connection is the currency of wellness. And however you do that is important, whether you're doing it virtually or whether you're doing it in person. We need to keep that at the apex. Healthy emotional connection is the currency of wellness. And if we focus on that, more things will sort of fall in place, right? The details will get worked out. But if we focus on connection, I'm connected to you. I see you. I witness you. I honor you. I'm here for you. You don't scare me. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to hold space no matter what. Don't you worry. You get to go through your process, but I'm going to be here, okay? Just know that, okay? Whether that's we start that in person and then we go to virtual, they still need that connection. They still need to know that somebody's not leaving them, abandoning them, and saying, now you're on your own, okay? So that's really the promise we're trying to fulfill by joining those two paradigms, brick and mortar and virtual. And so that's the opportunity. And now we get to start to innovate, both personally and professionally, to sort of make that start to come true so that we can start to see the effects of that going forward.
It's incredible. And I mean, everything you've talked about is spot on. I mean, it's best practice, right? It's the things like we talked about. We've known it for a long time, you know, the family dynamics. And just like you talked about as a little boy sitting at that door, listening to the cars come by as you're waiting for your dad to come and he never comes. It's so vivid in your mind, right? That trauma, that wound is vivid, and it wasn't the only one. It compacted, right? It got added on top of one after another after another. Most people, that was their life. They had no idea that was trauma.
That's right.
That's all they knew.
No.
And so what you're talking about is a way for people to finally identify what's underneath, right? Those core pieces, to finally be able to show up and live authentically, live true to the values they determine. And whether that's on the street or whether that's, you know, in a 4,000 square foot home, whatever that looks like, they get to choose. And we need to give them dignity and support in doing it, right? Like, there's not one way.
You just gave me chills. No, you just gave me chills. Because ultimately, you know, my experience was, and I mentioned it briefly before we got onto the broadcast, was, you know, my parents and my family, like most, are organized around the behavior and symptoms, and they want to control those, stop those, and manage those. And meanwhile, behind I was just coaching somebody the other day, and I said, this is what it looks like. So this is the behavior and symptoms, and I'm the patient, or I'm the son, or the father, and look at me. You can't see me, right? You get glimpses of me, but you're not looking at me. This is the friction, and that's the behavior and symptoms. And if we just organize around that, we're missing everything. We're missing the conversation, like you just mentioned. Not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you.
Tell me your story, right? Let's show up. And what you can't see, what the listeners can't see, is Timothy has got his hands in front of his face. I can't see him, but we're trying to talk to him and trying to communicate with him, and he can't see us and hear us because there's too much noise going on for him, and we're not listening to his story. We're not trying to meet him where he is, right? And so I love that. I love that imagery.
Yeah, and everybody was just like, stop what you're doing, stop what you're doing. And I was like, and I couldn't articulate it because I'm dealing with my own shame, right? So I'm fighting through the shame. So that's my friction over here, right? That's the stuff that's in the way, right? And that's what we're trying to mitigate, right? As a professional, I want to mitigate what's ever in the way from where, you know, that's blocking me from where I am to achieving what you just said. That feeling of dignity and respect and being seen and respected for what I went through, the truth of what I went through, the pain, like what happened to you? Tell me your story. Like, cause it's absolutely critical to you to transform you. And again, the shame, we need to work on the shame. There's another big key word you and I need to work on, right? We got to work on the shame. We got to figure out whose shame that is and give it back to them, because that's a big blocker for us, right? We've got these big blocks. We've got these big rocks that we're trying to move around, and we need help, and we need a longitudinal help. And so that's best practices, like you said. I love those. I love that phrase. What is the best practice? What is the best chance of success for any one person to get from where they are to some sort of resolution of those painful parts of their lives, that shame, that trauma, that original wound. And that's the joy and the privilege of my life, is to be able to sort of be in that space to figure out how we can make it easier for people to do that.
Yeah, and what I will say, Timothy, is you sharing your story was connection, right? It's connection, and it's you've told your story, I'm sure, a bazillion times, and that's kind of the industry, but it's healing not only for you but for me as well, right? Because I can do my work when other people are doing their work, and so it's exactly what you said. It's when you can hold a space for somebody without judgment, with just love and compassion. And I love that currency of connection, right? It's all about the connection. We do not have to save anybody. Matter of fact, we cannot. Our job is to simply show up, and there's nothing more powerful than that. So I love your words today. I love the concept that you've shared. I imagine there's going to be a lot of people want to connect with you and talk with you and maybe even, get into treatment. How do they connect with you, and how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, I would just go to NuLifeVirtual.com. There's plenty of opportunity on there to connect through phone numbers and emails and calls to action, learn more, like typical websites. But there's plenty of opportunity on the website to do that. And you can go to the About Us and discover what our team. We're a team of people, of humans. This is a human-centered company. This isn't a technology-centered company by any means, because we know we can't get there from there if we're technology centered. We got to be human centered, and that's really important in terms of just the whole thing we've been talking about. We've been in treatment centered care for too long. We need to move that paradigm to human centered, human healthcare consumer centered, right? Because then we can listen to their stories just like you and I talked about, and we can start to move forward.
Yeah. And we can go with them on the journey, right? Everybody needs somebody to go with them on the journey and know that they are going to be there, like you said, no matter how bad it gets and how angry you get and how scary you might be. I'm still going to show up, and you can do what you need to do, but I'm still there, right? I'm still going to show up.
Staying right here.
Right? Because those abandonment and attachment is so huge with connection. So I love it, Timothy. I love that you're willing to come with us today and share, and I want to be able to connect with you in the future too, and just,
Let's do it. I would love to, Shelley. Absolutely.
So thank you.
Thank you so much. You bet.